the different boys react to the confirmation of the beast? And what do their different reactions suggest about what archetypes they might be fitting? We're picking up the chapter right after Ralph and Piggy have discovered that some of the other older boys have left to join Jack's tribe. And the second half of chapter 8 is probably where things kind of go wild and probably one of the most exciting chapters, so get ready. Simon had passed through the area of fruit trees, but today the little ones had been too busy with the fire on the beach, and they had not pursued him there. He went on among the creepers until he reached the great mat that was woven by the open space and crawled inside. Beyond the screen of leaves, the sunlight pelted down, and the butterflies danced in the middle their unending dance. He knelt down, and the arrow of the sun fell on him. That other time, the air seemed to vibrate with heat, but now it threatened. Soon the sweat was running from his long, coarse hair. He shifted restlessly, but there was no avoiding the sun. Presently he was thirsty, and then very thirsty. He continued to sit. Far off, along the beach, Jack was standing before a small group of boys. He was looking brilliantly happy. "Hunting," he said. He sized them up. Each of them wore the remains of a black cap, and ages ago they had stood in 2 demure rows, and their voices had been the song of angels. So remember that this is the choir. They used to, presumably they were part of a private school that also had a church, and so they would be young boys who sang religious songs. They're described as having the voices of angels. So keep in mind this religious imagery, because now they are turning into devils, they're turning into demons, and so I want you to kind of be aware of that language used to describe them. "We'll hunt. I'm going to be chief." They nodded, and the crisis passed easily. And then, about the beast. They moved and looked at the forest. "I say this, we aren't going to bother about the beast." He nodded at them. "We are going to forget the beast." "That's right, yes, forget the beast." If Jack was astonished by their fervor, he did not show it. "And another thing, we shan't dream so much down here. This is near the end of the island." They agreed passionately out of the depths of their tormented private lives. "Now listen, we might go later to the Castle Rock, but now I'm going to get more of the big uns away from the conch and all that. We'll kill a pig and give a feast." He paused and went on more slowly. "And about the beast, when we kill, we'll leave some of the kill for it. Then it won't bother us, maybe." He stood up abruptly. "We'll go to the forest now and hunt." He turned and trotted away, and after a moment they followed him obediently. They sprang out nervously into the forest. Almost at once Jack found the dung and scattered roots that told of pig, and soon the track was fresh. Jack signaled the rest of the hunt to be quiet, and went forward by himself. He was happy, and wore the damp darkness of the forest like his old clothes. He crept down a slope to rocks and scattered trees by the sea. The pigs lay, bloated bags of fat, sensuously enjoying the shadows under the trees. There was no wind, and they were unsuspicious, and practice had made Jack silent as the shadows. He stole away again, and instructed his hidden hunters. Presently they all began to inch forward, sweating in the silence and heat. Under the trees an ear flapped idly. A little apart from the rest, sunk in deep maternal bliss, lay the largest sow of the lot. She was black and pink, and the great bladder of her belly was fringed with a row of piglets that slept or burrowed and squeaked. So, remember in the last chapter, Jack tried to fight a boar. He tried to kill a boar, and he got a cut, not a terrible cut, but a cut on his forearm and was unable to kill it. So now he's going for easier prey. He's going for a much more vulnerable sow, female pig. She's a nursing mother. She's got these piglets with her, so presumably an easier kill, but also a more cruel kill, and a more short-sighted one. If he kills the nursing mother, then these piglets might not survive. He might be screwing up the ecosystem of the island and making it harder in the future to hunt pigs, which again fits in with this theme that we've kind of been seeing throughout the whole novel of this perfect, pristine, natural island, and then these boys come, mankind comes, and screws everything up, right? We talked about the scar on the beach made by the airplane crashing. We talked about the big portion of the mountain that the boys have ruined with their big wildfire. We talked about even how they can't use the bathroom in like the single place that they determined should be where they go, and instead they just go all over the island. So again and again we see them screwing up this perfect natural place. 15 yards from the drove, Jack stopped, and his arms straightening, pointed at the sow. He looked round in inquiry to make sure that everyone understood, and the other boys nodded at him. The row of right arms slid back. Now! The drove of pigs started up, and at a range of only 10 yards the wooden spears with fire-hardened points flew towards the chosen pig. One piglet, with a demented shriek, rushed into the sea, trailing Roger's spear behind it. The sow gave a gasping squeal and staggered up, with 2 spears sticking in her fat flank. The boys shouted and rushed forward. The piglets scattered, and the sow burst the advancing line and went crashing away through the forest. After her! They raced along the pig track, but the forest was too dark and tangled, so that Jack, cursing, stopped them and cast among the trees. Then he said nothing for a time, but breathed fiercely so that they were awed by him, and looked at each other in uneasy admiration. Presently he stabbed down at the ground with his finger. There! Before the others could examine the drop of blood, Jack had swerved off, judging a trace, touching a bough that gave. So he followed, mysteriously right and assured, and the hunters trod behind him. He stopped before a covert. And there! They surrounded the covert, but the sow got away with the sting of another spear in her flank. The trailing butts hindered her, and the sharp criss-cross points were a torment. She blundered into a tree, forcing a spear still deeper, and after that any of the hunters could follow her easily by the drops of vivid blood. The afternoon wore on, hazy and dreadful with damp heat. The sow staggered her way ahead of them, bleeding and mad, and the hunters followed, wedded to her in lust, excited by the long chase and the dropped blood. They could see her now, nearly got up with her, but she spurted with her last strength, and held ahead of them again. They were just behind her when she staggered into an open space where bright flowers grew and butterflies danced round each other, and the air was hot and still. So she's found her way to Simon's hideout, right? He's hidden behind the mat of leaves, but the clearing with the butterflies, the hot air and still air, that's where Simon is, and he is actually seeing this whole scene. Here, struck down by the heat, the sow fell, and the hunters hurled themselves at her. This dreadful eruption from an unknown world made her frantic. She squealed and bucked, and the air was full of sweat and noise and blood and terror. Roger ran round the heap, prodding with his spear whenever pig flesh appeared. Jack was on top of the sow, stabbing downwards with his knife. Roger found a lodgment for his point, and began to push till he was leaning with his whole weight. The spear moved forward inch by inch, and the terrified squealing became a high-pitched scream. Then Jack found the throat, and the hot blood spouted over his hands. The sow collapsed under them, and they were heavy and fulfilled upon her. The butterflies still danced, preoccupied in the center of the clearing. At last, the immediacy of the kill subsided. The boys drew back, and Jack stood up, holding out his hands. "Look!" He giggled and flicked them while the boys laughed at his reeking palms. Then Jack grabbed Maurice and rubbed the stuff over his cheek. Roger began to withdraw his spear, and the boys noticed it for the first time. Robert stabilized the thing in a phrase which was received uproariously. "Right up her ass! Did you hear? Did you hear what he said? Right up her ass!" This time, Robert and Maurice acted the 2 parts, and Maurice's acting of the pig's effort to avoid the advancing spear was so funny that the boys cried with laughter. At length, even this paled. Jack began to clean his bloody hands on the rock. Then he started work on the sow and paunched her, lugging out the hot bags of colored guts, pushing them into a pile on the rock while the others watched him. He talked as he worked. "We'll take the meat along the beach. I'll go to the platform and invite them to a feast. That should give us time." Roger spoke. "Chief? Huh. How can we make a fire?" Jack squatted back and frowned at the pig. "We'll raid them and take fire. There must be 4 of you. Henry and you, Maurice and Bill. We'll put on paint and sneak up. Roger can snatch a branch while I say what I want. The rest of you can get this back to where we were. We'll build the fire there. And after that... He paused and stood up, looking at the shadows under the trees. I'm going to pause there really quick. So the scene where they kill this pig is a really important scene. We are going to be looking at it through a close read in class, so I'm not going to go into it here. But I did want to stop and point out that Roger is sort of coming up in prominence under this new tribe that Jack is creating. He's kind of become a lieutenant, a second in command. He had the assist with the kill. His use of the spear destabilized the pig a lot right before Jack cut his throat. He has the important job of being the one to steal the fire, and he's also about to sharpen the stick for the sacrifice. And for those of you especially who have Roger as your character who you're doing a chart for, but also for everyone, why might this kind of second in command role be Roger's preference? Why might this be better for him than being the one who is the leader? And what kind of person is he? What's he all about? He paused and stood up, looking at the shadows under the trees. His voice was lower when he spoke again, but will leave part of the kill for... He knelt down again and was busy with his knife. The boys crowded round him. He spoke over his shoulder to Roger. Sharpen a stick at both ends. Presently he stood up, holding the dripping sow's head in his hand. Where's that stick? Here. Ram one end in the earth. Oh, it's rock. Jam it in that crack, there. Jack held up the head and jammed the soft throat down on the pointed end of the stick, which pierced through into the mouth. He stood back, and the head hung there, a little blood dribbling down the stick. Instinctively, the boys drew back too, and the forest was very still. They listened, and the loudest noise was the buzzing of flies over the spilled guts. Jack spoke in a whisper. Pick up the pig. Maurice and Robert skewered the carcass, lifted the dead weight, and stood ready. In the silence, standing over the dry blood, they suddenly looked furtive. Jack spoke loudly. This head is for the beast. It's a gift. The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could, through the forest towards the open beach. So now the beast has transformed in their minds. It's gone from this thing that they're frightened of to something that they worship, almost like it's a pagan god of death and destruction, and they're leaving it this sacrifice, this really creepy sacrifice of a severed pig's head in the hopes that it will appease the beast and will and it won't bother them. Of course, we as readers, knowing that the beast is the violence and evil within the boys themselves, can kind of see it as almost as doing the same thing. Like maybe with the killing of this pig, they have satisfied their need for destruction for a time. But it will always come back. Simon stayed where he was. Remember, he watched this whole situation. A small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head was still remained like an after-image. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business. So we have Ralph and Piggy still clinging to this idea that the grown-ups would know what to do, that grown-up reason and logic is the way to keep things safe and sane. Simon also sees the world of the grown-ups, but he sees it in a more clear way. He sees the cynicism of it. He's seen what people are, and he's seen that it is bad. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business, that there's no hope. He is hopeless. I know that. Simon discovered that he had spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head, grinning amusedly at the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast? Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. Run away, said the head silently. Go back to the others. It was a joke, really. Why should you bother? You were just wrong, that's all. A little headache, something you ate, perhaps. Go back, child, said the head silently. Simon looked up, feeling the weight of his wet hair, and gazed at the sky. Up there, for once, were clouds, great bulging towers that sprouted away over the island, gray and cream and copper-colored. The clouds were sitting on the island. They squeezed, produced moment by moment this close, tormenting heat. Even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. Simon lowered his head, carefully keeping his eyes shut, then sheltered them with his hand. There were no shadows under the trees, but everywhere a pearly stillness, so that what was real seemed elusive and without definition. The pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. After a while these flies found Simon. Gorged, they alighted by his runnels of sweat and drank. They trickled under his nostrils and played leapfrog on his thighs. They were black and iridescent green and without number. And in front of Simon, the lord of the flies hung on his stick and grinned. At last Simon gave up and looked back, saw the white teeth and dim eyes, the blood, and his gaze was held by that ancient, inescapable recognition. In Simon's right temple, a pulse began to beat on the brain. So Simon's having a rough time here, having witnessed this. He has recognized something ancient and inescapable. What do you think that thing is? What has he recognized after watching this scene? And it's affecting him really drastically. Remember, the last time we saw him, he was thirsty, and then very thirsty. So now we can assume that he is incredibly thirsty. So he's dehydrated. We've talked a little bit in class about how he might have epilepsy, and that might account for his fainting spells that he gets sometimes. So he's not in a good place physically, and definitely not in a good place mentally. And we're going to check back in with him in a little bit. Ralph and Piggy lay in the sand, gazing at the fire and idly flicking pebbles into its smokeless heart. That branch is gone. Where's Sam and Eric? We ought to get some more wood. We're out of green branches. Ralph sighed and stood up. There were no shadows under the palms in the platform, only this strange light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. High up among the bulging clouds, thunder went off like a gun. We're going to get buckets of rain. What about the fire? Ralph trotted into the forest and returned with a wide spray of green which he dumped on the fire. The branch crackled, the leaves curled, and the yellow smoke expanded. Piggy made an aimless little pattern in the sand with his fingers. Trouble is, we haven't got enough people for a fire. You gotta treat Sam and Eric as one turn. They do everything together. Of course. Well, that isn't fair, don't you see? They ought to do 2 turns. Ralph considered this and understood. He was vexed to find how little he thought like a grown-up, and sighed again. The island was getting worse and worse. Piggy looked at the fire. You'll want another green branch soon. Ralph rolled over. Piggy, what are we going to do? Just have to go on without him. But the fire. He frowned at the black and white mess in which lay the unburnt ends of branches. He tried to formulate. I'm scared. He saw Piggy look up and blundered on. Not of the beast. I'm scared of that too. But nobody else understands about the fire. If someone threw you a rope when you were drowning, if a doctor said, take this because if you don't take it, you'll die, you would, wouldn't you? Of course I would. Can't they see? Can't they understand? Without the smoke signal, we'll die here. Look at that. A wave of heated air trembled above the ashes, but without a trace of smoke. We can't keep one fire going, and they don't care. And what's more, he looked intensely into Piggy's streaming face. What's more, I don't sometimes. Supposing I got like the others, not caring. What'd become of us? Piggy took off his glasses, deeply troubled. I don't know, Ralph. We just got to go on, that's all. That's what grown-ups would do. So again, Piggy insistent on the world of the grown-ups holding the answers, holding the solution. He can't confront the idea of the beast, so he sticks with this very British approach, the whole keep calm and carry on idea of the motivational posters that the British made during the bombing of the Germans in World War II. This idea that you need to have a stiff upper lip, you need to have fortitude and self-discipline and stay calm in the face of danger and adversity, and that is what Piggy is clinging to. And with it, this respect for adult life and this idea that the adults know what to do and that we should mimic them if we want to survive. Ralph, having begun the business of unburdening himself, continued, "Piggy, what's wrong?" Piggy looked at him in astonishment. "Do you mean the—" "No, not it. I mean, what makes things break up like they do?" Piggy rubbed his glasses slowly and thought. When he understood how far Ralph had gone towards accepting him, he flushed pinkly with pride. "I don't know, Ralph. I expect it's him." "Jack?" "Jack." A taboo was evolving around that word, too. Ralph nodded solemnly. "Yes," he said. "I suppose it must be." So Ralph asked this question, why do things break up like they do? And Piggy answers with Jack. And what Piggy means by Jack is illogical behavior and a lack of common sense and acting foolishly and holding courage and hunting and violence above all else. And we'll see as Simon continues his discussion with the Lord of the Flies, with the pig's head on the stick, he kind of gets at that question too, and the Lord of the Flies answers that question kind of in the same way and kind of differently, so pay attention when we get there. The forest near them burst into uproar. Demonic figures with faces of red and white and green rushed out howling so that the little ones fled screaming. Out of the corner of his eye, Ralph saw Piggy running. 2 figures rushed at the fire, and he prepared to defend himself, but they grabbed half-burnt branches and raced away along the beach. The 3 others stood still, watching Ralph, and he saw that the tallest of them, stark naked save for paint and a belt, was Jack. Ralph held his breath and spoke. "Well?" Jack ignored him, lifting his spear, and began to shout. "Listen, all of you. Me and my hunters, we're living along the beach by a flat rock. We hunt and feast and have fun. If you want to join my tribe, come and see us. Perhaps I'll let you join, perhaps not." He paused and looked around. He was safe from shame or self-consciousness behind the mask of his paint, and could look at each of them in turn. Ralph was kneeling by the remains of the fire like a sprinter at his mark, and his face was half hidden by hair and smut. Sam and Eric peered together round a palm tree at the edge of the forest. A little one howled, creased and crimson, by the bathing pool, and Piggy stood on the platform, the white conch gripped in his hands. "Tonight we're having a feast. We've killed a pig and we've got meat. You can come and eat with us if you like." Up in the cloud canyons, the thunder boomed again. Jack and the 2 anonymous savages with him swayed, looked up, and then recovered. The little one went on howling. Jack was waiting for something. He whispered urgently to the others. "Go on, now." The 2 savages murmured. Jack spoke sharply. "Go on." The 2 savages looked at each other, raised their spears together, and spoke in time. "The chief has spoken." Then the 3 of them turned and trotted away. Presently, Ralph rose to his feet, looking at the place where the savages had vanished. Sam and Eric came, talking in an awed whisper. "I thought it was, and I was scared." Piggy stood above them on the platform, still holding the conch. "That was Jack and Maurice and Robert," said Ralph. "Aren't they having fun?" So I wanted to point out fun here and how it's changed. Remember in Chapter 1, Ralph said, "This is a good island. We're going to have fun on this island. There's no grown-ups. Won't it be like a fun adventure story?" And now that's Jack's piece, right? He says, "We hunt and feast and have fun." And Ralph also says they look like they're having fun. And his version of fun looks much more different, right? He's got these rituals in place now. He has Maurice and Robert chanting "The chief has spoken" in this kind of weird tribal ritual, and we'll see that he's kind of instituting a lot of these weird tribal rituals, but his level of fun is a little bit darker, a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more threatening. And again, as Simon talks to the Lord of the Flies in the next couple pages, we'll see him bring that idea up too. "I thought I was going to have asthma. Sucks to your ass, Mar. When I saw Jack, I was sure he would go for the conch. Can't think why." The group of boys looked at the white shell with affectionate respect. Piggy placed it in Ralph's hands, and the little ones, seeing the familiar symbol, started to come back. "Not here." He turned towards the platform, feeling the need for ritual. First went Ralph, the white conch cradled, then Piggy, very grave, then the twins, then the little ones and others. "Sit down, all of you. They raided us for fire. They're having fun. But Ralph was puzzled by the shudder that flickered in his brain. There was something he wanted to say. Then the shudder had come down. But They were regarding him gravely, not yet troubled by any doubts about his sufficiency. Ralph pushed the idiot hair out of his eyes and looked at Piggy. But the fire! Yes, of course, the fire! He started to laugh, then stopped and became fluent instead. The fire's the most important thing. Without the fire, we can't be rescued. I'd like to put on war paint and be a savage, but we must keep the fire burning. The fire's the most important thing on the island because... He paused again, and the silence became full of doubt and wonder. Piggy whispered urgently, "Rescue." "Oh, yes, without the fire we can't be rescued. So we must stay by the fire and make smoke." When he stopped, no one said anything. After the many brilliant speeches that had been made on this very spot, Ralph's remarks seemed lame, even to the little ones. At last, Bill held out his hands for the conch. "Now we can't have the fire up there, because we can't have the fire up there. We need more people to keep it going. Let's go to this feast and tell them the fire's hard on the rest of us. Then hunting and all that, being savages, I mean, it must be jolly good fun." Sam and Eric took the conch. "That must be fun, like Bill says. And he's invited us to a feast. Meat! Crackling! I could do with some meat." Ralph held up his hand. "Why shouldn't we get our own meat?" The twins looked at each other. Bill answered, "We don't want to go in the jungle." Ralph grimaced. "He, goes. He's a hunter. They're all hunters. That's different." No one spoke for a minute, then Piggy muttered to the sand, "Meat." The little ones sat, solemnly thinking of meat and dribbling. Overhead, the cannon boomed again, and the dry palm fronds clattered in a sudden gust of hot wind. "You are a silly little boy," said the Lord of the Flies. "Just an ignorant, silly little boy." Simon moved his swollen tongue, but said nothing. "Don't you agree?" said the Lord of the Flies. "Aren't you just a silly little boy?" Simon answered him in the same silent voice. "Well, then," said the Lord of the Flies, "you'd better run off and play with the others. They think you're batty. You don't want Ralph to think you're batty, do you? You like Ralph a lot, don't you? And Piggy, and Jack." Simon's head was tilted slightly up. His eyes could not break away, and the Lord of the Flies hung in space before him. "What are you doing out here all alone? Aren't you afraid of me?" Simon shook. "There isn't anyone to help you, only me. And I'm the beast." Simon's mouth labored, brought forth audible words. "Pig's head on a stick." "Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill," said the head. For a moment or two the forest and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. "You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go. Why things are what they are." So again, Ralph's question, why do things break up? The Lord of the Flies is answering that question too. It's the beast, it's the evil inside of us that causes things to break up. Which is kind of the same answer Piggy gave, right? Jack. Jack is embodying that evil right now. The laughter shivered again. "Come now," said the Lord of the Flies. "Get back to the others and we'll forget the whole thing." Simon's head wobbled. His eyes were half closed as though he were imitating the obscene thing on the stick. He knew that one of his times was coming. The Lord of the Flies was expanding like a balloon. So remember he talked about Simon being epileptic and experiencing seizures. So he knows that he's about to experience one now. So he's also really dehydrated. So he's having some difficulties. "This is ridiculous. You know perfectly well you'll only meet me down there. So don't try to escape." Simon's body was arched and stiff. The Lord of the Flies spoke in the voice of a schoolmaster. "This has gone quite far enough. My poor misguided child, do you think you know better than I do?" There was a pause. "I'm warning you. I'm going to get angry. Don't you see? You're not wanted. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. Understand? We're going to have fun on this island. So don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else." So now the fun is a threat. The fun for the group means danger for someone else. Simon found he was looking into a vast mouth. There was blackness within, a blackness that spread. "Or else," said the Lord of the Flies, "we shall do you. See, Jack and Roger and Maurice and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph. Do you see?" Simon was inside the mouth. He fell down and lost consciousness. So this scene is also really important, and we are going to look more in depth into it in class and make some comparisons with it. But that concludes Chapter 8.